Question 1. The investigation demonstrates that a North Dakota resident, previously convicted of a misdemeanor offense, is unsure if this conviction impacts their eligibility for a Class 1 or Class 2 firearm license. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for this individual to determine their firearm possession rights under North Dakota law? Option A. Assume that a misdemeanor conviction does not disqualify them from possessing firearms in North Dakota, as firearm restrictions typically apply only to felony convictions. Option B. Proceed with firearm ownership and apply for a license, hoping the conviction will not be flagged during the background check process. Option C. Rely on advice from online firearm enthusiast forums and discussions with friends who own firearms in North Dakota. Option D. Directly contact the North Dakota Attorney General's office or the Bureau of Criminal Investigation for official guidance regarding the impact of their specific misdemeanor conviction on firearm rights. The correct answer is D. Directly contact the North Dakota Attorney General's office or the Bureau of Criminal Investigation for official guidance regarding the impact of their specific misdemeanor conviction on firearm rights. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a firearm owner in North Dakota is seeking to understand the implications of a recent conviction for a misdemeanor offense on their ability to possess a firearm. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to navigate complex legal statutes and understand how a past legal issue impacts their current firearm rights, necessitating careful judgment to ensure compliance with North Dakota law. The best approach involves proactively seeking clarification from the appropriate North Dakota state agency responsible for firearm regulations. This is correct because North Dakota law, specifically the North Dakota Century Code, NDCC, concerning firearms, outlines specific prohibitions for individuals convicted of certain crimes. By directly contacting the relevant state authority, the applicant ensures they receive accurate, up-to-date information tailored to their specific situation and North Dakota's legal framework. This proactive step demonstrates a commitment to understanding and adhering to the law, which is ethically sound and legally prudent. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on informal advice from friends or online forums. This is professionally unacceptable because such sources are not authoritative and may provide inaccurate or outdated information, leading to potential legal violations. Furthermore, North Dakota law requires adherence to its specific statutes, and informal advice does not constitute legal compliance. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that a misdemeanor conviction does not affect firearm rights. This is professionally unacceptable, as North Dakota law may prohibit firearm possession for individuals convicted of certain misdemeanors, depending on the nature of the offense and its relation to violence or domestic abuse as defined in the NDCC. Making assumptions without verifying with official sources can lead to illegal possession. A further incorrect approach would be to ignore the conviction and proceed with firearm ownership as if no issue exists. This is professionally unacceptable and legally dangerous. North Dakota law has provisions for firearm prohibitions based on criminal history, and failing to address a disqualifying conviction can result in severe penalties, including criminal charges. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Identifying the specific legal question or concern. 2. Determining the relevant jurisdiction's laws and regulations, in this case, North Dakota Century Code. 3. Identifying the official state agency or authority responsible for enforcing those regulations. 4. Proactively contacting that authority for definitive guidance. 5. Documenting any advice received. Question 2. Analysis of a North Dakota resident applying for Class 1 firearm license indicates they currently reside in temporary housing and state they will arrange for proper firearm storage once they secure a permanent residence. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing officer? Option A. Inquire about the applicant's specific plan for safe firearm storage during their temporary housing situation and their timeline for securing permanent housing, while explaining the importance of immediate compliance with safe storage principles. Option B. Advise the applicant to postpone their application until they have secured permanent housing and established a compliant storage solution. Option C. Deny the firearm license application due to the applicant's current inability to demonstrate immediate proper firearm storage. Option D. Grant the firearm license immediately, with the understanding that the applicant will arrange for proper storage at a later date. Correct answer is A. Inquire about the applicant's specific plan for safe firearm storage during their temporary housing situation and their timeline for securing permanent housing, while explaining the importance of immediate compliance with safe storage principles. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent with the objective requirements for firearm licensing, specifically concerning the safe storage of firearms. The applicant's personal circumstances, while potentially sympathetic, cannot override the legal mandates designed to ensure public safety and responsible firearm ownership in North Dakota. A careful judgment is required to uphold the law without being unduly harsh, but the primary responsibility is to adhere to the established licensing criteria. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's submitted documentation and a direct inquiry into their current firearm storage arrangements. This approach is correct because North Dakota Century Code, NDCC, Section 62, 1-02-01, mandates that an applicant for a firearm license must demonstrate they are not prohibited from possessing firearms and that they understand the laws regarding their use and storage. Specifically, while NDCC does not explicitly detail storage requirements for the license application itself, responsible licensing officers are expected to ensure applicants comprehend and intend to comply with safe storage practices, which are implicitly tied to responsible ownership and are often a prerequisite for lawful possession. Verifying the applicant's understanding and intent to comply with safe storage principles, even if temporary, is a crucial step in assessing their suitability and commitment to lawful firearm handling. This aligns with the broader ethical obligation to promote firearm safety. An incorrect approach would be to grant the license solely based on the applicant's assurance that they will arrange for proper storage at a later date, without any verification or immediate plan. This fails to adequately assess the applicant's current capacity to comply with responsible firearm ownership principles, potentially overlooking immediate safety risks. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license outright based on the temporary lack of immediate proper storage, without exploring the applicant's plan or willingness to rectify the situation. While safety is paramount, a rigid denial without considering the applicant's intent to comply with safe storage practices might be overly punitive and not reflective of the spirit of the law, which aims to license responsible owners. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the applicant's personal circumstances and their stated desire for self-protection, disregarding the legal requirements for demonstrating responsible ownership and understanding of storage laws. While the applicant's motivation is noted, it does not supersede the legal framework governing firearm licensing in North Dakota. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves a systematic evaluation. 1. Understand the legal requirements. Identify all relevant North Dakota statutes and administrative rules pertaining to firearm licensing and safe storage. 2. Gather information. Collect all necessary documentation from the applicant. 3. Assess compliance. Evaluate the applicant's information against the legal requirements. 4. Address discrepancies. If there are any gaps or potential issues like temporary storage concerns, engage with the applicant to clarify and seek resolution. 5. Make a decision. Based on a comprehensive assessment, determine if the applicant meets all licensing criteria. 6. Document the decision. Maintain clear records of the assessment process and the final decision. Question 3. Consider a scenario where an individual in North Dakota is considering purchasing a high-powered pellet gun that fires metal projectiles at significant velocity. They are unsure if possessing this item requires them to obtain a Class 1 or Class 2 firearm license as mandated by North Dakota law. Which of the following actions best reflects a responsible and legally compliant approach to this situation? Option A. Ask friends or search online forums for opinions on whether a pellet gun requires a firearm license in North Dakota. Option B. Rely on general knowledge about firearms and common perceptions of what constitutes a gun to make a decision. Option C. Review the North Dakota Century Code to determine the legal definition of a firearm and compare it to the specifications of the pellet gun. Option D. Assume that any device capable of firing a projectile requires a firearm license and proceed with obtaining the necessary permits. The correct answer is C. Review the North Dakota Century Code to determine the legal definition of a firearm and compare it to the specifications of the pellet gun. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the nuanced requirements of North Dakota firearm licensing while also considering the ethical implications of their actions. The core challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying North Dakota Century Code, NDCC, provisions related to firearm possession and licensing, particularly when faced with a situation that could be misconstrued or lead to unintended legal consequences. The individual must demonstrate a thorough understanding of what constitutes a firearm under North Dakota law and the specific licensing requirements for possessing such items. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a direct and accurate interpretation of North Dakota law. This means understanding that under NDCC Chapter 23-01, a firearm is generally defined as any weapon designed to expel a projectile by the action of an explosive. Therefore, a pellet gun, while capable of expelling a projectile, typically does not meet the legal definition of a firearm requiring a Class 1 or Class 2 license in North Dakota, as it does not utilize an explosive charge. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the statutory definitions provided by North Dakota law, ensuring compliance and avoiding unnecessary legal complications. It prioritizes accurate legal knowledge over assumptions or broad interpretations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that any device capable of firing a projectile requires a firearm license. This is a failure to adhere to the specific definitions within NDCC. The law is precise, and assuming broader applicability without consulting the statutory definition can lead to unnecessary licensing applications and potential confusion. Another incorrect approach is to rely on general knowledge or common perceptions of what constitutes a gun, rather than the specific legal definition in North Dakota. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence in understanding the applicable regulations and could result in misinterpreting the law, potentially leading to actions that are either overly cautious or, conversely, non-compliant if the device in question did fall under the legal definition of a firearm. A further incorrect approach is to seek advice from individuals who are not qualified to interpret North Dakota firearm laws, such as friends or online forums, without verifying the information against official state statutes. This can lead to the dissemination and adoption of misinformation, which is a significant ethical and legal failing when dealing with regulated items like firearms. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal accuracy and due diligence. This involves 1. Identifying the specific jurisdiction and relevant laws, North Dakota Century Code. 2. Consulting the precise legal definitions of terms like firearm within those statutes. 3. Applying these definitions to the specific item in question. 4. If ambiguity remains after consulting the statutes, seeking clarification from official sources such as the North Dakota Attorney General's Office or a legal professional specializing in firearm law. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are based on verifiable legal requirements, not assumptions or hearsay. Question 4. During the evaluation of a Class 1 or Class 2 firearm license application in North Dakota, an applicant presents a clean record with no felony convictions or other explicit disqualifiers as outlined in North Dakota Century Code Chapter 62. 1. However, during the interview, the applicant expresses a vague and somewhat aggressive intent regarding the protection of their property that raises a slight concern for the licensing officer. Though no specific threat is made, what is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing officer? Option A. Deny the license immediately due to the officer's subjective feeling of unease regarding the applicant's vague aggressive statements. Option B. Issue the license without further inquiry, as the applicant has no explicit disqualifiers listed in North Dakota Century Code Chapter 62. 1. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's stated purpose and demeanor, cross-referencing this with the specific disqualifiers in North Dakota Century Code Chapter 62. 1. And if no statutory disqualifiers are met, proceed with issuing the license while documenting the concerns. Option D. Initiate an extensive, intrusive background investigation into the applicant's personal life beyond the scope of typical firearm license checks, based on the officer's intuition. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's stated purpose and demeanor, cross-referencing this with the specific disqualifiers in North Dakota Century Code Chapter 62. 1. And if no statutory disqualifiers are met, proceed with issuing the license while documenting the concerns. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent with the potential for misuse of a firearm, all within the specific legal framework of North Dakota. The applicant's history, while not a disqualifier under North Dakota law for a Class 1 or Class 2 license, introduces a layer of concern that necessitates careful consideration beyond a simple check of disqualifying factors. The decision-making process must prioritize adherence to North Dakota Century Code, NDCC, provisions regarding firearm licensing, while also exercising responsible judgment. The best approach involves a thorough review of the applicant's stated purpose for seeking the license and cross-referencing this with any available information that might indicate a risk, even if not explicitly disqualifying under NDCC. This includes considering the applicant's demeanor and the plausibility of their stated intent. North Dakota law focuses on specific disqualifiers for firearm possession and licensing, such as felony convictions or domestic violence restraining orders. However, the licensing authority also has a duty to ensure that firearms are not being acquired for unlawful purposes. Therefore, a nuanced evaluation that considers the totality of the circumstances, while strictly adhering to the defined disqualifiers in NDCC Chapter 62. 1. Is the most responsible course of action. This approach acknowledges the applicant's rights while fulfilling the licensing authority's obligation to public safety within the bounds of North Dakota law. An approach that solely relies on the absence of explicit disqualifiers in NDCC Chapter 62. 1. Without any further inquiry into the applicant's stated purpose or demeanor is insufficient. While North Dakota law does not require a good cause or need for a concealed weapon license, the licensing authority must still process applications in good faith. Ignoring potential red flags, even if not explicitly listed as disqualifiers, could be seen as a failure to exercise due diligence. Another incorrect approach would be to deny the license based solely on a subjective feeling of unease or a past incident that is not a statutory disqualifier under North Dakota law. This would be an arbitrary denial and could expose the licensing authority to legal challenges. The decision must be grounded in the specific provisions of NDCC Chapter 62. 1. Finally, an approach that involves extensive, intrusive background checks beyond what is permitted or required by North Dakota law for this type of license would be an overreach and a violation of the applicant's privacy rights. The investigation must be proportionate to the licensing requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant statutes, NDCC Chapter 62. 1. This framework should then incorporate a systematic review of the application against these statutory requirements. Where the application appears to meet the statutory criteria, but there are subjective concerns, the professional should document their observations and any further reasonable inquiries made, ensuring these inquiries remain within legal and ethical boundaries. The final decision must be clearly justifiable based on the law and the documented facts. Question 5. Research into the application for a North Dakota Class 1 firearm license reveals that the applicant has listed sporting purposes as their primary reason for seeking the license, yet their submitted documentation includes a recent conviction for a misdemeanor involving a hunting regulation violation in Montana. What is the most appropriate course of action for the North Dakota Licensing Authority? Option A. Contact the applicant directly to request a detailed explanation for the discrepancy between their stated purpose and their recent conviction, and review any additional documentation they may provide. Option B. Contact the Montana Fish and Wildlife Department to investigate the specifics of the hunting regulation violation without informing the applicant. Option C. Approve the firearm license application as submitted, assuming the Montana conviction is unrelated to firearm ownership and the applicant's stated purpose is sufficient. Option D. Immediately deny the firearm license application due to the applicant's past hunting regulation violation, assuming it indicates a disregard for firearm-related laws. The correct answer is A. Contact the applicant directly to request a detailed explanation for the discrepancy between their stated purpose and their recent conviction, and review any additional documentation they may provide. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated intent with the objective assessment of their suitability for a firearm license, all within the strict confines of North Dakota law. The core challenge lies in discerning genuine intent from potential misrepresentation, especially when the applicant's history presents a red flag. Careful judgment is required to avoid both unwarranted denial and the issuance of a license to an individual who may pose a risk. The best approach involves a thorough, objective review of all submitted documentation and a direct, fact-finding inquiry with the applicant regarding the specific discrepancy. This method directly addresses the missing information and allows for a clear understanding of the applicant's circumstances without making premature assumptions. North Dakota Century Code, NDCC Section 62, 1-02-01 outlines the requirements for firearm licenses, emphasizing that applicants must meet certain criteria, including demonstrating a lawful purpose. By seeking clarification on the stated purpose, the licensing authority is fulfilling its duty to verify eligibility and ensure compliance with the law. This approach respects due process by giving the applicant an opportunity to explain. An incorrect approach would be to immediately deny the license based solely on the discrepancy without further investigation. This fails to provide the applicant with an opportunity to clarify the situation and could lead to an unlawful denial if the discrepancy is explainable. It bypasses the due diligence required by the licensing process. Another incorrect approach is to approve the license without addressing the discrepancy. This is a failure to uphold the licensing authority's responsibility to ensure all applicants meet the statutory requirements. It creates a potential risk by overlooking a detail that might be significant. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to contact the applicant's former employer for information without a clear legal basis or the applicant's consent. This could violate privacy laws and is an unnecessary step when direct inquiry with the applicant is the most appropriate and legally sound first step. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective evidence, direct communication with the applicant, and adherence to statutory requirements. This involves 1. Identifying the discrepancy, 2. Seeking direct clarification from the applicant, 3. Evaluating the applicant's explanation against the requirements of NDCC Section 62, 1-02-01. 4. Making a decision based on the totality of the information, ensuring fairness and legal compliance. Question 6. Quality control measures reveal that a friend, who is a resident of North Dakota, has expressed a strong desire to borrow a handgun you legally own. Your friend mentions they have never owned a firearm before and are unsure about the licensing process. Considering North Dakota's firearm regulations, what is the most responsible course of action to take regarding your friend's request? Option A. Transfer the handgun to your friend immediately, trusting their character and assuming they will handle the legalities later if needed. Option B. Allow your friend to borrow the handgun for an extended period, assuming that since it's a personal loan and not a sale, the strict transfer laws do not apply. Option C. Advise your friend on the legal requirements for firearm possession in North Dakota and confirm their eligibility to legally possess a handgun before any transfer of possession occurs, declining to transfer if they are not legally eligible. Option D. Suggest that your friend can keep the handgun at your residence and use it only when you are present, as this avoids a formal transfer. The correct answer is C. Advise your friend on the legal requirements for firearm possession in North Dakota and confirm their eligibility to legally possess a handgun before any transfer of possession occurs, declining to transfer if they are not legally eligible. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate desire to assist a friend with the strict legal and ethical obligations surrounding firearm ownership and transfer in North Dakota. The core of the challenge lies in understanding and adhering to the specific licensing and transfer requirements mandated by North Dakota law, even when personal relationships are involved. Failure to do so can result in severe legal penalties and compromise public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves strictly adhering to North Dakota's legal framework for firearm transfers. This means ensuring that any transfer of a firearm to another individual is conducted in accordance with all applicable state and federal laws, which typically includes verifying the recipient's eligibility to possess a firearm. In North Dakota, While a Class 1 or Class 2 license is not universally required for private firearm transfers between residents, the act of transferring a firearm to someone who is legally prohibited from possessing one is a serious offense. Therefore, the most responsible action is to confirm the friend's legal eligibility to possess a firearm before any transfer occurs, which might involve advising them to obtain the necessary permits if they do not already possess them, or to decline the transfer if they are prohibited. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above personal convenience or friendship. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to facilitate the transfer of the firearm to the friend without verifying their legal eligibility to possess it. This directly violates North Dakota law, which prohibits the transfer of firearms to individuals who are legally prohibited from owning them. Such an action could lead to criminal charges for both the transferor and the recipient, and it undermines the state's efforts to regulate firearm ownership for public safety. Another incorrect approach is to suggest that the friend can simply borrow the firearm indefinitely without any formal transfer or background check. This circumvents the intent of firearm transfer laws. While temporary possession might have different legal nuances, facilitating ongoing possession without ensuring legal eligibility is functionally equivalent to an illegal transfer and carries similar risks. A third incorrect approach is to assume that because the friend is a personal acquaintance, the standard legal requirements for firearm transfers do not apply. North Dakota law does not create exceptions for personal relationships when it comes to the legal transfer of firearms. All transfers must comply with the law, regardless of the relationship between the parties. This assumption demonstrates a dangerous disregard for legal obligations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field involving regulated items, such as firearms, must operate within a strict decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This framework involves 1. Identifying the relevant laws and regulations governing the situation, in this case, North Dakota firearm transfer laws. 2. Assessing the specific circumstances and potential risks involved. 3. Evaluating available courses of action against the legal and ethical standards. 4. Choosing the course of action that ensures full compliance and minimizes risk to public safety and personal legal standing. In situations involving personal relationships, it is crucial to consciously separate personal feelings from professional responsibilities, and to apply the same rigorous standards of compliance as would be applied to a stranger. Question 7. The control framework reveals that a North Dakota resident who legally owns a handgun has heard about a recent amendment to state law concerning the secure storage of firearms to prevent unauthorized access by minors. To ensure they are compliant with North Dakota law, which of the following actions represents the most responsible and legally sound method for determining their storage obligations? Option A. Continuing to store the handgun in the same manner as before the law amendment, assuming no significant changes were made that would affect their current practice. Option B. Following the storage advice provided by a fellow firearm enthusiast on a popular online forum dedicated to firearms in North Dakota. Option C. Reviewing the most current and official text of the North Dakota Century Code sections, specifically addressing firearm storage and child access prevention. Option D. Relying on general knowledge of firearm safety principles without consulting specific North Dakota statutes. The correct answer is C. Reviewing the most current and official text of the North Dakota Century Code sections, specifically addressing firearm storage and child access prevention. Explanation. The control framework reveals a situation where a firearm owner in North Dakota is seeking to understand the implications of a recent change in state law regarding the storage of handguns. The professional challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying the new legislation to ensure compliance and prevent potential legal ramifications, especially concerning the safety of minors. This requires a nuanced understanding of North Dakota Century Code, NDCC, provisions related to firearm storage and child access prevention. The best approach involves directly consulting the most current and authoritative version of the North Dakota Century Code pertaining to firearm storage and child access prevention. This method is correct because it relies on the official legal text, which is the ultimate source of regulatory requirements. Specifically, NDCC Chapter 23-03. 1. Which addresses child access prevention and any amendments or related statutes concerning firearm storage would provide the definitive guidance. Adhering to the explicit language of the law ensures compliance and demonstrates a commitment to responsible firearm ownership as mandated by North Dakota statutes. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on informal advice from a friend or online forum discussions. This is professionally unacceptable because such sources are not legally authoritative and may contain outdated, misinterpreted, or inaccurate information. Relying on them could lead to a violation of NDCC provisions, potentially resulting in penalties. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that previous storage practices are still compliant without verifying against the new law. This demonstrates a failure to proactively update one's understanding of legal obligations and could inadvertently create an unsafe environment, contravening the spirit and letter of child access prevention laws. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes seeking information from primary legal sources. This involves identifying the relevant statutes, e.g., NDCC Chapter 23-03. 1. Accessing the official codified laws of North Dakota and carefully reading and understanding the specific requirements for firearm storage, particularly concerning the prevention of access by minors. If ambiguity exists, consulting with a legal professional specializing in North Dakota firearm law would be the next prudent step. Question 8. The performance metrics show a significant increase in applications for North Dakota Class 1 and Class 2 firearm licenses from individuals who have recently relocated to the state for temporary work assignments, often staying in short-term rentals or with friends. Considering the North Dakota Century Code, NDCC, Chapter 62. 1. What is the most appropriate course of action for an applicant whose primary residence is in another state but who is temporarily residing in North Dakota for employment? Options. A. The applicant should only proceed with the licensing process if they can demonstrate that North Dakota is their fixed and permanent abode, as defined by state law, and that they have no intention of returning to their previous primary residence. B. The applicant can apply for a North Dakota firearm license as long as they have a valid North Dakota address where they receive mail and are physically present in the state for the majority of the year. C. The applicant should rely on the advice of their employer or colleagues who have successfully obtained North Dakota firearm licenses while working temporarily in the state. D. The applicant should assume that temporary residency for employment purposes is sufficient to meet the residency requirements for a North Dakota firearm license. Option A. The applicant should assume that temporary residency for employment purposes is sufficient to meet the residency requirements for a North Dakota firearm license. Option B. The applicant should rely on the advice of their employer or colleagues who have successfully obtained North Dakota firearm licenses while working temporarily in the state. Option C. The applicant should only proceed with the licensing process if they can demonstrate that North Dakota is their fixed and permanent abode, as defined by state law, and that they have no intention of returning to their previous primary residence. Option D. The applicant can apply for a North Dakota firearm license as long as they have a valid North Dakota address where they receive mail and are physically present in the state for the majority of the year. The correct answer is C. The applicant should only proceed with the licensing process if they can demonstrate that North Dakota is their fixed and permanent abode, as defined by state law, and that they have no intention of returning to their previous primary residence. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance the legal requirements for firearm possession with the practical realities of their living situation and potential risks. The core challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying North Dakota Century Code, NDCC, Chapter 62. 1 regarding firearm licenses, specifically concerning residency and the implications of temporary living arrangements. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance without unnecessarily infringing upon legal rights. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to the residency requirements as defined by North Dakota law for obtaining a Class 1 or Class 2 firearm license. This means verifying that the individual meets the statutory definition of a North Dakota resident, which typically involves demonstrating a fixed and permanent abode within the state. If the individual's living situation is temporary or they maintain a primary residence elsewhere, they may not be eligible for a North Dakota license. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal framework established by NDCC Chapter 62. 1, which is designed to ensure that firearm licenses are issued to individuals with a demonstrable connection to the state. Ethical considerations also support this, as it prevents potential misuse of licensing by individuals who do not have a vested interest in the state's community and safety. An incorrect approach would be to assume that simply possessing a firearm within North Dakota, regardless of residency status, qualifies an individual for a license. This fails to acknowledge the statutory definition of residency, which is a fundamental prerequisite for licensing under NDCC Chapter 62. 1. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice from friends or online forums without consulting the official statutes or relevant authorities. This bypasses the established legal process and could lead to a violation of the law. Finally, attempting to circumvent residency requirements by providing misleading information about one's living situation would constitute a serious ethical and legal breach, potentially leading to criminal penalties and the revocation of any license obtained under false pretenses. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and factual accuracy. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal requirements of the relevant jurisdiction, North Dakota Century Code Chapter 62. 1. 2. Gathering all pertinent facts about the individual's situation, particularly regarding their residency. 3. Applying the law to the facts to determine eligibility. 4. Seeking clarification from official sources, e.g., the North Dakota Attorney General's Office or law enforcement agencies, if there is any ambiguity. 5. Making a decision based solely on legal eligibility and factual evidence, avoiding assumptions or informal advice. Question 9. System analysis indicates a North Dakota resident who is a licensed firearm dealer has a potential buyer for a handgun. The buyer appears nervous, and the dealer has a vague feeling of unease about the buyer's suitability, though the buyer has not exhibited any overt signs of being prohibited from owning a firearm. Under North Dakota law, what is the most appropriate course of action for the dealer? Option A. Suggest the buyer find another seller or attempt to arrange a private sale where a background check might not be required. Option B. Proceed with the sale only after completing a background check through the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS, via a licensed dealer, as mandated by North Dakota Century Code. Option C. Refuse to sell the handgun based on the dealer's personal feeling of unease, without initiating any formal transfer process. Option D. Sell the handgun directly to the buyer without conducting any background check, trusting the buyer's appearance and demeanor. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the sale only after completing a background check through the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS, via a licensed dealer, as mandated by North Dakota Century Code. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance personal beliefs and perceived safety concerns with the strict legal requirements for firearm possession and transfer in North Dakota. The core conflict lies in the potential for a personal ethical stance to override established legal procedures, which can have serious legal ramifications for both the seller and the potential buyer. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are compliant with North Dakota Century Code, NDCC, Chapter 23-07. 1. Which governs firearm sales and transfers. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to the legal requirements for firearm transfers in North Dakota. This means completing a background check through the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, NICS, via a licensed dealer, regardless of the seller's personal feelings about the buyer's suitability or the firearm itself. This approach is correct because NDCC 23-07. 1 mandates that all firearm sales or transfers, with limited exceptions not applicable here, must be processed through a licensed dealer who will conduct a NICS check. This ensures that firearms are not transferred to individuals prohibited from owning them under federal or state law, thereby upholding public safety and legal compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. 1 incorrect approach involves refusing to sell the firearm based on a personal feeling of unease, without following the legally prescribed transfer process. This is ethically and legally problematic because it bypasses the established legal framework for firearm transfers. While the seller has the right to refuse a sale, doing so without engaging the legal process can lead to misunderstandings and potential legal issues if the buyer perceives discrimination, or if the seller is acting as an unlicensed dealer by engaging in repeated private sales without proper procedure. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with the sale without any background check, relying solely on the buyer's apparent demeanor or reputation. This is a direct violation of NDCC 23-07. 1. It creates a significant risk of transferring a firearm to a prohibited person, which carries severe penalties for the seller and poses a direct threat to public safety. This approach disregards the legal safeguards designed to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands. A third incorrect approach is to suggest the buyer obtain the firearm through a straw purchase or to facilitate an illegal transfer. This is not only unethical, but also a serious criminal offense. It undermines the entire purpose of firearm regulations and directly contributes to illegal firearm trafficking, with severe legal consequences for all involved. Professional reasoning. Professionals in firearm sales and transfers in North Dakota must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance above all else. This involves understanding and strictly adhering to NDCC Chapter 23-07. 1. When faced with a potential sale, the professional should first confirm the legal requirements for the transaction. If the transaction falls under the purview of licensed dealer requirements, then the process must be initiated through a licensed dealer for a NICS background check. Personal opinions or feelings about the buyer should not influence the adherence to legal procedures. If a buyer is found to be prohibited during the NICS check, the sale is legally prohibited. If the seller has reservations but the buyer passes the NICS check, the sale can proceed legally, but the seller always retains the right to refuse a sale for any lawful reason, provided they do not engage in illegal activities or discrimination. The guiding principle is to act within the bounds of the law, ensuring public safety and avoiding personal or legal liability. Question 10. Which approach would be the most accurate and legally compliant method for a North Dakota resident applying for a Class 1 firearm license to determine if they are within the permissible firearm ownership limits, given they are purchasing 2 new handguns and already own 3 rifles and 1 shotgun? Option A. Sum the 2 new handguns with the 3 rifles and 1 shotgun to arrive at a total of 6 firearms. Option B. Count only the 2 new handguns, as these are the firearms relevant to the current purchase. Option C. Estimate the total number of firearms by rounding up the number of new handguns to 4 and adding them to the previously owned firearms. Option D. Calculate the total based on the number of firearms previously registered with the state, assuming it does not exceed the limit. Correct answer is A. Sum the 2 new handguns with the 3 rifles and 1 shotgun to arrive at a total of 6 firearms. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to accurately calculate the total number of firearms they possess, considering both newly acquired and previously owned items, to determine if they exceed the legal limit for a Class 1 firearm license in North Dakota. Miscalculation could lead to an illegal possession charge or failure to obtain the correct license, impacting their ability to legally own and transport firearms. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves meticulously summing the number of firearms the applicant intends to acquire with those they already legally own. This approach directly addresses the core requirement of the Class 1 firearm license application, which is to declare all firearms in possession. North Dakota Century Code, NDCC Section 62. 1-02-01 outlines the requirements for firearm licenses. An accurate reporting of firearm inventory is fundamental to compliance. This method ensures the applicant is aware of their total firearm count and can confirm they meet the licensing criteria without exceeding any statutory limits. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that only counts the firearms the applicant intends to acquire for the new license application is incorrect because it fails to account for firearms already legally possessed. This omission violates the spirit and letter of NDCC Section 62. 1-02-01 by providing an incomplete and misleading inventory. Such an oversight could lead to an applicant unknowingly exceeding the legal firearm limit for their license class. An approach that relies solely on the number of firearms previously registered with the state, without including newly acquired ones, is also flawed. While past registration is relevant, it does not reflect the current total inventory. The application requires a snapshot of all firearms at the time of application, not a historical record. This failure to update the inventory constitutes a misrepresentation, an approach that estimates the total number of firearms based on a general understanding of firearm ownership, rather than precise counting, is professionally unacceptable. Precision is paramount when dealing with legal requirements and firearm counts. Estimation introduces a significant risk of error and does not meet the standard of due diligence required for a firearm license application under North Dakota law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and verifiable approach to inventory management when applying for firearm licenses. This involves creating a detailed list of all firearms, including make, model, serial number, and current location, and then performing a clear summation. When in doubt, it is always best to err on the side of caution and seek clarification from the issuing authority or legal counsel to ensure full compliance with North Dakota Century Code. Question 11. Investigation of a Class 1 firearm license application in North Dakota reveals the applicant has stated their primary purpose is for personal protection and sport shooting. Given the applicant has no prior criminal record, what is the most responsible course of action for the licensing authority to ensure compliance with North Dakota Century Code Chapter 62? 1. Option A. Conduct a targeted inquiry to verify the legitimacy of the stated purposes, cross-referencing with known prohibited uses under North Dakota law, and confirming the applicant's understanding of safe firearm handling and storage requirements. Option B. Deny the license based on a general concern that personal protection could be interpreted broadly and potentially lead to misuse. Option C. Immediately approve the license as the applicant has no criminal record and has provided a stated purpose. Option D. Request extensive personal financial records from the applicant to assess their overall stability and likelihood of responsible firearm ownership. The correct answer is A. Conduct a targeted inquiry to verify the legitimacy of the stated purposes, cross-referencing with known prohibited uses under North Dakota law, and confirming the applicant's understanding of safe firearm handling and storage requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the potential misuse of a firearm license. The core difficulty lies in balancing the applicant's stated intent with the licensing authority's responsibility to ensure public safety and adherence to North Dakota firearm laws. A hasty approval without due diligence could inadvertently facilitate illegal activity, while an overly cautious denial without proper investigation could unfairly penalize a legitimate applicant. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing interests. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough investigation into the applicant's stated purpose for obtaining the Class 1 or Class 2 firearm license, specifically focusing on the intended use of the firearm in relation to North Dakota Century Code, NDCC Chapter 62. 1. This approach requires verifying the legitimacy of the stated purpose, such as hunting, sport shooting, or self-defense, and cross-referencing this with any available information that might indicate a prohibited use under North Dakota law. This proactive verification ensures compliance with the spirit and letter of the law, which mandates that licenses are issued to individuals who are not prohibited from possessing firearms and intend to use them lawfully. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately approve the license based solely on the applicant's self-declaration of intent. This fails to meet the licensing authority's obligation to conduct due diligence and ensure the applicant is not seeking the license for unlawful purposes, which is a fundamental aspect of responsible firearm licensing under NDCC Chapter 62. 1. Another incorrect approach is to deny the license outright due to a vague suspicion without any concrete evidence of prohibited intent. This would be an arbitrary denial and could violate the applicant's rights if they are otherwise eligible under North Dakota law. The licensing authority must have a basis for denial grounded in the specific provisions of NDCC Chapter 62. 1. A further incorrect approach is to request extensive personal financial information unrelated to the firearm license application. While background checks are necessary, the scope of inquiry must be relevant to firearm possession and licensing eligibility as defined by North Dakota statutes, not a broad fishing expedition for unrelated personal data. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes lawful compliance, public safety, and procedural fairness. This involves 1. Understanding the specific requirements and prohibitions outlined in NDCC Chapter 62. 1. 2. Conducting a risk-based assessment of each application, focusing on the stated purpose and any red flags. 3. Gathering relevant information through established investigative procedures, ensuring all inquiries are directly related to licensing eligibility. 4. Documenting all findings and decisions meticulously. 5. Applying a consistent and objective standard to all applications. Question 12. Considering North Dakota's firearm regulations, if an individual was convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence 5 years ago and has otherwise maintained a clean record, what is the legally permissible course of action regarding firearm possession? Option A. Refrain from possessing any firearm until legal rights are formally restored through appropriate legal processes, such as expungement or a pardon that specifically addresses the federal prohibition. Option B. Assume that since the conviction was a misdemeanor and no further offenses have occurred, the prohibition on firearm possession has expired. Option C. Seek advice from friends or online communities to determine if firearm possession is permissible given the circumstances. Option D. Possess a handgun for personal protection, as the conviction was a misdemeanor and occurred several years ago, and the firearm is intended solely for self-defense. The correct answer is A. Refrain from possessing any firearm until legal rights are formally restored through appropriate legal processes, such as expungement or a pardon that specifically addresses the federal prohibition. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of North Dakota firearm laws concerning the possession of a firearm by a person who has been convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence. The core challenge lies in understanding the specific federal and state prohibitions that apply and how they interact. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to severe legal consequences, including felony charges for unlawful possession of a firearm. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between general firearm rights and specific prohibitions triggered by past convictions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to North Dakota Century Code Chapter 23-07-3, which addresses prohibited persons and firearm possession in conjunction with relevant federal statutes. Specifically, this approach requires recognizing that a conviction for a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, as defined by federal law, 18 U.S.C. Section 921A, 33A, and mirrored in state law, generally prohibits an individual from possessing firearms. Therefore, the correct action is to refrain from possessing any firearm, including a handgun, until legal rights are restored through appropriate legal channels, such as expungement or a pardon, if such relief is available and legally effective in removing the federal prohibition. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety by respecting the prohibitions outlined in law. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that because the conviction was a misdemeanor and occurred some time ago, the prohibition no longer applies, especially if the individual has not been convicted of any other crimes. This is incorrect because both federal and North Dakota law establish clear prohibitions for individuals convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence, regardless of the time elapsed or the absence of subsequent conviction. Law does not automatically lift these prohibitions without specific legal action. Another incorrect approach is to believe that since the firearm is for personal protection and not for criminal purposes, possession is permissible. This is incorrect because the law focuses on the status of the individual, i.e., having a disqualifying conviction, rather than the intended use of the firearm. The prohibition is absolute for possession, regardless of intent. A further incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding firearm legality. This is incorrect because legal interpretations must be based on statutes and official guidance. Informal advice is unreliable and can lead to serious legal jeopardy. The specific nuances of firearm laws, particularly concerning prohibited persons, require consultation with legal counsel or direct reference to the North Dakota Century Code and federal law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal accuracy and risk mitigation. This involves 1. Identifying the specific legal question. Does a prior misdemeanor domestic violence conviction prohibit firearm possession in North Dakota? 2. Consulting authoritative sources, referencing the North Dakota Century Code, specifically Chapter 23-07-3 and relevant federal statutes, 18 U.S.C. Section 922G. 9. 3. Analyzing the facts against the law, determining if the conviction meets the definition of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence under applicable law. 4. Seeking clarification if necessary, if there is any ambiguity, consulting with a qualified legal professional specializing in firearm law or the relevant law enforcement agency for official interpretation. 5. Acting in accordance with the law, making a decision based on the confirmed legal status, prioritizing compliance even if it means foregoing a desired action. Question 13. Quality control measures reveal that a North Dakota resident who possesses a Class 1 firearm license has allowed their license to expire 2 weeks ago, but has already submitted the renewal application. They are planning to transport a firearm for a hunting trip this weekend and are considering whether their expired license, coupled with the pending renewal, is sufficient for legal possession during transport in North Dakota. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Transport the firearm without the license, believing that the renewal application negates the need for a current license for a short, lawful purpose. Option B. Contact the North Dakota Sheriff's Department to explain the situation and request a temporary permit for the hunting trip. Option C. Proceed with the hunting trip, carrying the expired license and the proof of renewal application submission. Assuming law enforcement will be understanding. Option D. Postpone the hunting trip until the renewed Class 1 firearm license is officially received and is current. Correct answer is D. Postpone the hunting trip until the renewed Class 1 firearm license is officially received and is current. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance personal convenience and the desire to avoid minor administrative burdens against strict adherence to North Dakota firearm licensing regulations. The core conflict lies in the potential for a seemingly minor oversight to have significant legal repercussions, impacting the individual's ability to legally possess and transport firearms. Careful judgment is required to prioritize legal compliance over personal expediency. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively ensuring all required documentation, including the valid Class 1 or Class 2 firearm license, is readily accessible and current before engaging in any activity that necessitates its presentation. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and preparedness. In North Dakota, possessing a firearm while the license is expired, even if the renewal process has been initiated, is a violation of state law. Therefore, the individual must possess a currently valid license. Incorrect approach is analysis. Allowing the license to expire and relying on the pending renewal application to justify possession is a regulatory failure. North Dakota law requires a valid, unexpired license for the privileges it confers. The initiation of a renewal process does not grant continued legal authority to carry or possess a firearm under the license until the renewal is officially approved and a new license is issued. Assuming that a brief, infrequent transport of a firearm for a non-prohibited purpose would not be scrutinized by law enforcement is a dangerous assumption and a failure to understand the scope of North Dakota's firearm laws. Ignorance of the law or a belief that enforcement is unlikely does not excuse noncompliance. The law applies regardless of the perceived risk of detection. Attempting to conceal the expired status of the license if questioned by law enforcement is a direct act of deception and a severe ethical and legal failure. This misrepresentation compounds the initial violation and can lead to additional charges, including those related to obstruction or providing false information. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any regulated field, especially those involving public safety and legal compliance like firearm ownership, must adopt a proactive and diligent approach to documentation and adherence to regulations. The decision-making framework should prioritize understanding the specific requirements of the governing jurisdiction, North Dakota, in this case, maintaining all necessary credentials in a current state, and always being prepared to demonstrate compliance. When in doubt about the validity of a license or permit, the prudent course of action is to err on the side of caution and refrain from activities that require it until full compliance is confirmed. This involves regular review of expiration dates and timely renewal processes, rather than relying on assumptions or post hoc justifications. Question 14. Quality control measures reveal that a North Dakota Class 1 and Class 2 firearm license applicant has been approved by the initial background check, but the licensing official subjectively feels uneasy about the applicant's demeanor and expresses a general concern that the applicant might not be responsible with a firearm. Based on this personal apprehension, the official is considering denying the license. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action for the licensing official in North Dakota? Option A. Issue the firearm license as the applicant has met all statutory requirements, and personal subjective feelings of unease are not grounds for denial under North Dakota law. Option B. Delay the licensing process indefinitely until further personal investigation can be conducted, without formally documenting the reasons for the delay or seeking legal counsel. Option C. Impose additional personal safety training requirements on the applicant that are not mandated by North Dakota's firearm licensing statutes. Option D. Deny the license based on the subjective feeling of unease, as the official's intuition is a valid indicator of potential future irresponsibility with a firearm. The correct answer is A. Issue the firearm license as the applicant has met all statutory requirements, and personal subjective feelings of unease are not grounds for denial under North Dakota law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance personal beliefs and perceived safety concerns with the legal requirements for firearm possession and licensing in North Dakota. The core of the challenge lies in navigating the distinction between personal apprehension and established legal standards for firearm ownership, particularly when those personal feelings might lead to actions that could be misconstrued or violate regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure adherence to North Dakota law, while also addressing any genuine safety concerns in a lawful and appropriate manner. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves understanding and strictly adhering to the North Dakota Century Code, NDCC, regarding firearm licenses and possession. This means recognizing that a Class 1 or Class 2 firearm license is a legal entitlement based on meeting specific criteria outlined in the NDCC, such as age, residency, and absence of disqualifying criminal history or mental health adjudication. If an individual believes they have a legitimate reason to deny a license based on specific statutory grounds, they must follow the established legal procedures for such a denial, which typically involves presenting evidence that directly contradicts the applicant's qualifications as defined by law. Simply having a personal feeling of unease or a subjective belief that an applicant might misuse a firearm, without concrete evidence of statutory disqualification, is not a legally permissible basis for denial. The law provides clear grounds for denial, and these must be followed. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to deny a license based solely on a subjective feeling of unease or a generalized concern about the applicant's potential future actions, without any specific evidence that the applicant fails to meet the statutory requirements for a North Dakota firearm license. This violates the principle of due process and the legal framework established by the NDCC, which mandates that denials be based on objective, legally defined criteria. Another incorrect approach is to delay the licensing process indefinitely based on personal apprehension, without initiating any formal review or seeking legal guidance on whether the individual's concerns constitute a statutory disqualifier. This can lead to an applicant being unfairly deprived of their rights and can create legal liabilities for the licensing authority. A further incorrect approach is to attempt to impose personal safety standards or additional requirements not stipulated in the North Dakota Century Code for firearm licensing. The licensing authority's role is to administer the law as written, not to create or enforce personal or subjective safety protocols beyond what is legally mandated. Professional reasoning. Professionals in licensing roles must operate within the defined legal parameters of their jurisdiction. The decision-making framework should prioritize adherence to the North Dakota Century Code. When faced with an applicant, the process should involve verifying that the applicant meets all stated requirements and, conversely, identifying if the applicant falls under any specific statutory disqualifications. If a subjective concern arises, the professional must assess whether that concern directly translates into a legally recognized disqualifying factor. If it does not, the license should be issued. If there is a genuine concern that aligns with a statutory disqualifier, the professional must follow the prescribed legal procedures for investigation and potential denial, ensuring that all actions are documented and justifiable under North Dakota law. Question 15. Quality control measures reveal that a licensed firearm owner in North Dakota is preparing to transport a handgun from their residence to a shooting range. The owner intends to place the handgun, unloaded, in a locked case in the trunk of their vehicle, with the ammunition stored separately in a locked container in the passenger compartment. Which of the following actions best demonstrates compliance with North Dakota's firearm licensing and transport regulations? Option A. Transporting the handgun unloaded in a locked case in the trunk, with ammunition stored separately in a locked container in the passenger compartment. Option B. Transporting the handgun loaded and concealed in a glove compartment for easy access at the range. Option C. Transporting the handgun unloaded and openly displayed on the dashboard of the vehicle. Option D. Transporting the handgun unloaded but in an unlocked bag on the passenger seat, with ammunition in a separate pocket of the same bag. Correct answer is A. Transporting the handgun unloaded in a locked case in the trunk, with ammunition stored separately in a locked container in the passenger compartment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the responsible handling of a firearm and adherence to North Dakota's firearm licensing regulations. The core difficulty lies in balancing personal convenience with the legal and safety obligations associated with firearm ownership and transport. A lapse in judgment can lead to violations of North Dakota Century Code, NDCC, Chapter 62. 1. Which governs firearms and other weapons, and potentially compromise public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves understanding and strictly adhering to the specific provisions of NDCC Chapter 62. 1. Concerning the transport of a firearm. This means ensuring the firearm is unloaded and stored in a locked case, separate from ammunition, when transported in a vehicle. This approach directly aligns with the intent of the law to prevent accidental discharge and unauthorized access to firearms, thereby promoting public safety and demonstrating responsible firearm ownership as mandated by North Dakota law. Incorrect approach is analysis. Transporting a loaded firearm in the passenger compartment of a vehicle, even if concealed, directly violates NDCC 62. 1-02-04, which outlines conditions for carrying firearms. This action creates an immediate safety risk and demonstrates a disregard for legal requirements. Similarly, carrying a firearm openly without a permit, or transporting it in a manner that allows for immediate access, e.g., on the seat or in a readily accessible bag, also contravenes the spirit and letter of North Dakota's firearm laws, which prioritize safe storage and transport. These actions expose the individual to legal penalties and increase the risk of misuse or accidental discharge. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field involving regulated items such as firearms must prioritize a thorough understanding of applicable laws and regulations. The decision-making framework should involve 1. Identifying the relevant legal framework, in this case, NDCC Chapter 62. 1. 2. Understanding the specific requirements for the activity in question, transporting a firearm. 3. Evaluating personal actions against these requirements. 4. Prioritizing safety and legal compliance above personal convenience. When in doubt, seeking clarification from official sources or legal counsel is a prudent step. Question 16. Quality control measures reveal that a North Dakota Class 1 firearm license holder has misplaced their physical license and was carrying a concealed firearm when they discovered it was missing. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the license holder? Option A. Store the firearm unsecured in their residence until the license is located, as only household members have access. Option B. Immediately secure the firearm in a locked container and contact the North Dakota Sheriff's Department to report the lost license and inquire about the process for obtaining a replacement. Option C. Continue carrying the firearm, assuming the lost license will be found soon and the risk of being stopped is minimal. Option D. Wait to report the lost license to authorities until they are specifically asked for it by law enforcement. Correct answer is B. Immediately secure the firearm in a locked container and contact the North Dakota Sheriff's Department to report the lost license and inquire about the process for obtaining a replacement. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the responsible handling of a firearm and adherence to North Dakota's firearm licensing regulations. The core difficulty lies in balancing the individual's right to possess a firearm with the state's mandate for licensing and the prevention of misuse. A licensee's obligation extends beyond mere possession to ensuring safe and lawful storage, especially when others may have access to the premises. Failure to do so can have severe legal and ethical consequences, impacting public safety and the integrity of the licensing system. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately securing the firearm in a manner that prevents unauthorized access, such as a locked safe or case, and then contacting the North Dakota Sheriff's Department to report the lost license. This approach directly addresses both immediate safety concerns and the legal requirement to possess a valid license for carrying a concealed firearm. North Dakota Century Code, NDCC, Chapter 62, 1-04 outlines the requirements for carrying a concealed weapon, including the necessity of a license. Losing a license necessitates reporting and reapplication to maintain legal compliance. This proactive and responsible action demonstrates a commitment to upholding the law and public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to continue carrying the firearm without a license, assuming the lost license will be found or that the risk of being caught is low. This directly violates NDCC Chapter 62, 1-04, which mandates a license for carrying a concealed weapon. It demonstrates a disregard for legal obligations and significantly increases the risk of criminal charges and the revocation of any future licensing privileges. Another incorrect approach is to store the firearm unsecured in the home, believing it is safe because only household members have access. While the intent might be to keep it away from strangers, this fails to account for potential unauthorized access by minors or individuals who may not be responsible with firearms, even within a household. North Dakota law emphasizes responsible storage to prevent accidental discharge or theft, and unsecured storage, even within a home, can be deemed negligent. A third incorrect approach is to wait to report the lost license until it is requested by law enforcement. This passive approach does not fulfill the licensee's responsibility to maintain a valid license. The law requires a license to carry, and operating without one, even if temporarily misplaced, is a violation. Prompt reporting is essential for maintaining legal standing and demonstrating due diligence. Professional reasoning. Professionals in any field involving regulated activities, such as firearm ownership and licensing, must operate within a framework of strict legal compliance and ethical responsibility. When faced with a situation like a lost license, the decision-making process should prioritize immediate legal adherence and public safety. This involves understanding the specific regulations of the jurisdiction, in this case, North Dakota, assessing the immediate risks, and taking prompt, decisive action to rectify the situation. A proactive approach, prioritizing legal reporting and secure storage, is always superior to reactive or negligent behavior. Question 17. Quality control measures reveal that a licensed firearm owner in North Dakota stores their handgun unloaded in a locked gun case located in their master bedroom closet. The ammunition is stored separately in a locked box in the same closet. The owner has 2 young children who reside in the home. Considering North Dakota law, what is the most appropriate and legally compliant method for storing this firearm? Option A. Store the firearm in a locked safe with the key readily accessible in a nearby drawer. Option B. Store the firearm loaded on a high shelf in a bedroom closet. Option C. Store the firearm unloaded in an unlocked gun case in a closet accessible to children. Option D. Store the firearm unloaded in a locked container and store ammunition separately and securely. The correct answer is D. Store the firearm unloaded in a locked container and store ammunition separately and securely. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge related to responsible firearm ownership and storage in North Dakota, specifically concerning the safe handling and accessibility of firearms by individuals who may not be authorized to possess them. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the owner's right to possess firearms with the paramount duty to prevent unauthorized access, especially by minors, which carries significant legal and ethical implications under North Dakota law. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with storage regulations and to mitigate potential risks. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the firearm in a locked container or using a trigger lock, and storing ammunition separately and securely. This approach directly addresses the requirements of North Dakota Century Code Section 62, 1-02-05, which mandates that firearms be stored in a manner that prevents access by unauthorized persons, particularly minors. This method ensures the firearm is inaccessible to children, while still allowing the owner to maintain possession of their property. It demonstrates a proactive commitment to safety and legal compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. Storing the firearm unloaded but in an unlocked gun case in a closet accessible to children is a failure to meet the legal standard of preventing unauthorized access. North Dakota law requires more than just unloading. It necessitates active measures to secure the firearm. Leaving the firearm loaded and on a high shelf in a bedroom closet, even if out of immediate reach, still poses a significant risk of unauthorized access, especially by curious minors, and does not constitute secure storage as contemplated by law. Placing the firearm in a locked safe, but leaving the key in a nearby drawer accessible to anyone in the household, including minors, undermines the purpose of the safe and is not considered secure storage under the spirit or letter of North Dakota regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals in North Dakota dealing with firearm ownership should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and risk mitigation. This involves understanding the specific storage requirements outlined in North Dakota Century Code Section 62, 1-02-05. The framework should include 1. Identifying the legal obligations for firearm storage. 2. Assessing potential risks of unauthorized access, particularly by minors. 3. Implementing storage methods that demonstrably prevent such access. 4. Regularly reviewing and maintaining the security of stored firearms. This systematic approach ensures responsible ownership and adherence to North Dakota's firearm laws. Question 18. Compliance review shows a North Dakota resident who holds a valid Class II firearm license is concerned about an increase in petty crime in their neighborhood and feels generally uneasy when walking alone after dark. They are considering carrying their handgun at all times for personal protection. What is the most appropriate course of action for this individual to take regarding firearm possession? Option A. Carry the handgun only when there is a specific, articulable threat of imminent harm, ensuring all actions comply with North Dakota's legal definitions of justifiable self-defense and firearm licensing requirements. Option B. Rely on the general increase in neighborhood crime statistics to justify carrying the handgun whenever they feel it is necessary for their perceived safety. Option C. Carry the handgun at all times, as the Class II firearm license indicates a general preparedness for self-defense in any situation. Option D. Carry the handgun only when walking alone after dark, based on the subjective feeling of unease, without a specific threat. Correct answer is A. Carry the handgun only when there is a specific, articulable threat of imminent harm, ensuring all actions comply with North Dakota's legal definitions of justifiable self-defense and firearm licensing requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the legal requirements for firearm possession with the practical realities of personal safety and potential threats. The challenge lies in accurately assessing the necessity of carrying a firearm for self-defense in North Dakota, considering the specific legal framework and the individual's circumstances, without overstepping the bounds of the law or creating unnecessary risks. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with North Dakota's Class I and Class II firearm license regulations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to North Dakota's firearm licensing laws, specifically focusing on the criteria for obtaining and maintaining a Class I or Class II license. This includes understanding the legal definitions of justifiable self-defense within the state, and ensuring that any decision to carry a firearm is based on a reasonable and articulable fear of imminent harm, supported by the legal provisions governing the use of force. This approach is correct because it prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership as mandated by North Dakota statutes, ensuring that the individual acts within the defined legal parameters for carrying a concealed or openly carried firearm. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves carrying a firearm based solely on a general feeling of unease or a broad perception of crime in the area, without a specific, articulable threat. This fails to meet the legal standard for justifiable self-defense in North Dakota and could lead to charges if the firearm is discovered or used without immediate necessity. Another incorrect approach is to assume that possessing a valid Class 1 or Class 2 license automatically grants unrestricted permission to carry a firearm in all situations, regardless of context or potential escalation. This overlooks the nuanced legal requirements for the justifiable use of force and the responsibility that comes with carrying a firearm. A further incorrect approach is to rely on hearsay or anecdotal evidence from others about potential dangers to justify carrying a firearm, rather than conducting an objective assessment of personal risk based on verifiable information and the specific legal standards of North Dakota. This can lead to a misjudgment of the situation and potentially illegal firearm possession or use. Professional reasoning. Professionals in North Dakota dealing with firearm licensing and possession should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive review of North Dakota Century Code Chapter 62. 1. Firearms and any relevant administrative rules. This framework should emphasize understanding the specific conditions under which a Class 1 or Class 2 license is issued and the legal definitions of self-defense. Before carrying a firearm, an individual should ask, based on the current, specific circumstances, do I have a reasonable and articulable fear of imminent unlawful force, and is carrying a firearm the necessary and lawful response according to North Dakota law? This process ensures that actions are grounded in legal requirements and responsible judgment, not mere speculation or generalized fear. Question 19. The monitoring system demonstrates a potential security breach at a licensed firearm owner's residence in North Dakota, with an individual attempting to force entry. The owner, legally possessing a Class 1 firearm license, is inside and armed. Considering North Dakota's legal framework for the use of force, which of the following represents the most appropriate and legally defensible course of action for the licensee? Option A. Discharge the firearm in the direction of the individual attempting to force entry to scare them away. Option B. Immediately draw and aim the firearm at the individual attempting to force entry to deter them from proceeding. Option C. Assess the immediate threat to life and safety, consider all available non-lethal options, and only use the firearm if there is an unavoidable and imminent danger of death or serious bodily harm, consistent with North Dakota law. Option D. Abandon the residence and seek assistance from law enforcement, regardless of the immediate danger posed by the forced entry. The correct answer is C. Assess the immediate threat to life and safety, consider all available non-lethal options, and only use the firearm if there is an unavoidable and imminent danger of death or serious bodily harm, consistent with North Dakota law. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the licensee to balance the immediate need for self-defense with the legal obligations and ethical responsibilities associated with firearm ownership and use in North Dakota. The critical element is determining the appropriate and lawful response when confronted with a perceived threat, ensuring that actions taken are justifiable and do not exceed the bounds of North Dakota law regarding the use of deadly force. Misjudgment can lead to severe legal consequences and ethical breaches. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a measured and legally compliant response. This approach prioritizes de-escalation and the use of force only when absolutely necessary and legally permissible under North Dakota law. Specifically, it requires assessing the threat level, considering all available non-lethal options, and only resorting to the use of a firearm if there is an immediate and unavoidable danger of death or serious bodily harm to oneself or others, and if such force is reasonable and proportionate to the threat. This aligns with North Dakota Century Code, NDCC Section 12. 1-05-03, which outlines the justification for the use of deadly force, emphasizing that it is permissible only when the actor reasonably believes such force is necessary to prevent death or serious bodily injury. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately drawing and aiming a firearm at the first sign of perceived aggression, without attempting to assess the situation or explore de-escalation. This fails to meet the legal standard in North Dakota, which requires a reasonable belief of imminent danger of death or serious bodily harm before resorting to deadly force. It bypasses the crucial step of evaluating the necessity and proportionality of the response. Another incorrect approach is to retreat from the situation entirely, even if retreat would place the licensee in greater danger, or if the threat is immediate and unavoidable within their home or place of business, where they may have a right to stand their ground. While de-escalation is preferred, North Dakota law does not impose a duty to retreat when faced with a justifiable threat in certain locations. This approach might be ethically commendable in some contexts, but legally insufficient if it leads to harm that could have been lawfully prevented. A further incorrect approach is to use the firearm to intimidate or threaten the individual without an immediate and present danger of death or serious bodily harm. This constitutes an unlawful display of a firearm and could lead to criminal charges, as it exceeds the legal justification for the use of deadly force in North Dakota. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This framework involves 1. Threat assessment. Objectively evaluate the nature and imminence of the threat. 2. Legal justification. Determine if the situation meets the legal criteria for the use of force under North Dakota law, particularly NDCC Section 12, 1-05-03. 3. Proportionality. Ensure that any force used is proportionate to the threat. 4. De-escalation. Actively seek opportunities to de-escalate the situation and explore all non-lethal alternatives. 5. Documentation. If force is used, meticulously document the events and the rationale for the actions taken. Question 20. What factors determine the total acquisition cost of a firearm for Class 1 and Class 2 firearm license holder in North Dakota, requiring a calculation based on a firearm priced at $500, with a North Dakota state sales tax of 5% and a hypothetical local sales tax of 1.5%. Option A. The firearm's base price plus the North Dakota state sales tax, with an arbitrary additional fee. Option B. The firearm's base price plus an estimated total tax and fee amount. Option C. The firearm's base price plus the North Dakota state sales tax and the local sales tax. Option D. The firearm's base price only. The correct answer is C. The firearm's base price plus the North Dakota state sales tax and the local sales tax. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a firearm licensee in North Dakota to accurately calculate the total cost of firearm acquisition, including potential taxes and fees, to ensure compliance with financial regulations and personal budgeting. Miscalculating these costs could lead to insufficient funds, potential legal issues if a purchase is made without full payment capability, or an inability to acquire the desired firearm. The decision-making process hinges on meticulous attention to detail and understanding of applicable North Dakota tax laws. The best approach involves a precise calculation of the firearm's base price, adding the North Dakota state sales tax, and then factoring in any applicable local taxes or specific firearm transfer fees mandated by North Dakota law. This method ensures all financial obligations are met, aligning with the legal requirement to pay all applicable taxes and fees associated with a firearm purchase. It demonstrates responsible financial planning and adherence to North Dakota's regulatory framework for firearm transactions. An incorrect approach would be to only consider the base price of the firearm, ignoring North Dakota's sales tax. This fails to account for a mandatory financial obligation, potentially leading to an inability to complete the purchase or engaging in a transaction that is not fully compliant with state tax laws. Another incorrect approach is to estimate the total cost without performing the actual calculation, which introduces a significant risk of underestimation and financial shortfall. Finally, an approach that includes only the base price and a generic fee, without specifying or calculating it based on North Dakota regulations, is also flawed, as it lacks the precision required for accurate financial planning and regulatory compliance. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making framework that prioritizes accuracy and regulatory adherence. This involves 1. Identifying all known costs base price. 2. Researching and applying all relevant North Dakota tax rates, state sales tax, any applicable local taxes. 3. Identifying and adding any specific firearm transfer fees or other legally mandated charges in North Dakota. 4. Summing all identified costs to arrive at the total acquisition cost. This structured approach minimizes the risk of error and ensures compliance with all financial and legal requirements.